Chapter 27. Cousin Georgiana came down the lane leading up to her little house. She lived half a mile out of Deerwood, and she wanted to go into Amelia's and find out if Doss had come home yet. Cousin Georgiana was anxious to see Doss. She had something very important to tell her, something she was sure Doss would be delighted to hear. Poor Doss! She had had rather a dull life of it. Cousin Georgiana owned to herself that she would not like to live under Amelia's thumb, but that would be all changed now. Cousin Georgiana felt tremendously important. For the time being, she quite forgot to wonder which of them would go next. And here was Doss herself, coming along the road from Roaring Abel's in such a queer green dress and hat. Talk about luck! Cousin Georgiana would have a chance to impart her wonderful secret right away, with nobody else about to interrupt. It was, you might say, a providence. Valancy, who had been living for 4 days on her enchanted island, had decided that she might as well go into Deerwood and tell her relatives that she was married. Otherwise, finding that she had disappeared from Roaring Abel's, they might get out a search warrant for her. Barney had offered to drive her in, but she had preferred to go alone. She smiled very radiantly at Cousin Georgiana, who, she remembered as of someone known a long time ago, had really been not a bad little creature. Valancy was so happy that she could have smiled at anybody, even Uncle James. She was not averse to Cousin Georgiana's company. Already, since the houses along the road were becoming numerous, she was conscious that curious eyes were looking at her from every window. "I suppose you're going home, dear Doss?" said Cousin Georgiana as she shook hands, furtively eyeing Valancy's dress and wondering if she had any petticoat on at all. "Sooner or later," said Valancy cryptically. "Then I'll go along with you. I've been wanting to see you very especially, Doss dear. I've something quite wonderful to tell you." "Yes?" said Valancy absently. What on earth was Cousin Georgiana looking so mysterious and important about? But did it matter? No, nothing mattered but Barney and the Blue Castle up back in Mistowis. "Who do you suppose called to see me the other day?" asked Cousin Georgiana archly. Valancy couldn't guess. "Edward Beck." Cousin Georgiana lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "Edward Beck." Why the italics? And was Cousin Georgiana blushing? "Who on earth is Edward Beck?" asked Valancy indifferently. Cousin Georgiana stared. "Surely you remember Edward Beck," she said reproachfully. "He lives in that lovely house on the Port Lawrence Road, and he comes to our church regularly. You must remember him." "Oh, I think I do now," said Valancy with an effort of memory. "He's that old man with a wen on his forehead and dozens of children who always sits in the pew by the door, isn't he?" "Not dozens of children, dear. Oh, no, not dozens, not even 1 dozen, only 9, at least only 9 that count. The rest are dead. He isn't old, he's only about 48, the prime of life, Doss, and what does it matter about a wen?" "Nothing, of course," agreed Valancy quite sincerely. It certainly did not matter to her whether Edward Beck had a wen or a dozen wens or no wen at all, but Valancy was getting vaguely suspicious. There was certainly an air of suppressed triumph about Cousin Georgiana. Could it be possible that Cousin Georgiana was thinking of marrying again? Marrying Edward Beck? Absurd. Cousin Georgiana was 65 if she were a day, and her little anxious face was as closely covered with fine wrinkles as if she had been 100, but still. "My dear," said Cousin Georgiana, "Edward Beck wants to marry you." Valancy stared at Cousin Georgiana for a moment. Then she wanted to go off into a peal of laughter, but she only said, "Me? Yes, you. He fell in love with you at the funeral, and he came to consult me about it. I was such a friend of his first wife, you know. He is very much in earnest, Dossie, and it's a wonderful chance for you. He's very well off, and you know, you am not so young as I once was," agreed Valancy. "To her that hath shall be given. Do you really think I would make a good stepmother, Cousin Georgiana?" "I'm sure you would. You were always so fond of children." "But 9 is such a family to start with," objected Valancy gravely. The two oldest are grown up, and the third almost. That leaves only 6 that really count, and most of them are boys, so much easier to bring up than girls. There's an excellent book, Health Care of the Growing Child. Gladys has a copy, I think. It would be such a help to you. And there are books about morals. You'd manage nicely. Of course I told Mr. Beck that I thought you would. Jump at him, supplied Valancy. Oh, no, dear. I wouldn't use such an indelicate expression. I told him I thought you would consider his proposal favorably, and you will, won't you, dearie? There's only one obstacle, said Valancy dreamily. You see, I'm married already. Married? Cousin Georgiana stopped stock still and stared at Valancy. Married? Yes. I was married to Barney Snaith last Tuesday evening in Port Lawrence. There was a convenient gatepost hard by. Cousin Georgiana took firm hold of it. Doss, dear, I'm an old woman. Are you trying to make fun of me? Not at all. I'm only telling you the truth. For heaven's sake, Cousin Georgiana. Valancy was alarmed by certain symptoms. Don't go crying here on the public road. Cousin Georgiana choked back the tears and gave a little moan of despair instead. Oh, Doss, what have you done? What have you done? I've just been telling you. I've got married, said Valancy calmly and patiently, to that Barney Snaith. Why, they say he's had a dozen wives already. I'm the only one round at present, said Valancy. What will your poor mother say? Moaned Cousin Georgiana. Come along with me and hear, if you want to know, said Valancy. I'm on my way to tell her now. Cousin Georgiana let go the gatepost cautiously and found that she could stand alone. She meekly trotted on beside Valancy, who suddenly seemed quite a different person in her eyes. Cousin Georgiana had a tremendous respect for a married woman, but it was terrible to think of what the poor girl had done. So rash, so reckless. Of course, Valancy must be stark mad. But she seemed so happy in her madness that Cousin Georgiana had a momentary conviction that it would be a pity if the clan tried to scold her back to sanity. She had never seen that look in Valancy's eyes before. But what would Amelia say? And Ben? To marry a man you know nothing about, thought Cousin Georgiana aloud. I know more about him than I know of Edward Beck, said Valancy. Edward Beck goes to church, said Cousin Georgiana, does bar, does your husband. He has promised that he will go with me on fine Sundays, said Valancy. When they turned in at the Sterling Gate, Valancy gave an exclamation of surprise. Look at my rose bush. Why, it's blooming. It was. Covered with blossoms, great crimson velvety blossoms, fragrant, glowing, wonderful. My cutting it to pieces must have done it good, said Valancy, laughing. She gathered a handful of the blossoms. They would look well on the supper table of the veranda at Mistowis, and went, still laughing, up the walk, conscious that Olive was standing on the steps. Olive, goddess-like in loveliness, looking down with a slight frown on her forehead. Olive, beautiful, insolent, her full form voluptuous in its swathings of rose silk and lace, her golden brown hair curling richly under her big, white-frilled hat, her color ripe and melting. Beautiful, thought Valancy coolly, but, as if she suddenly saw her cousin through new eyes, without the slightest touch of distinction. So Valancy had come home, thank goodness, thought Olive. But Valancy was not looking like a repentant, returned prodigal. This was the cause of Olive's frown. She was looking triumphant, graceless, that outlandish dress, that queer hat, those hands full of blood-red roses. Yet there was something about both dress and hat, as Olive instantly felt, that was entirely lacking in her own attire. This deepened the frown. She put out a condescending hand. So you're back, Doss. Very warm day, isn't it? Did you walk in? Yes. Coming in? Oh, no. I've just been in. I've come often to comfort poor Auntie. She's been so lonesome. I'm going to Mrs. Bartlett's tea. I have to help pour. She's giving it for her cousin from Toronto. Such a charming girl. You'd have loved meeting her, Doss. I think Mrs. Bartlett did send you a card. Perhaps you'll drop in later on. No, I don't think so, said Valancy indifferently. I'll have to be home to get Barney's supper. We're going for a moonlit canoe ride around Mistowis tonight. Barney? Supper? Gasped Olive. What do you mean, Valancy Sterling? Valancy Snaith, by the grace of God. Valancy flaunted her wedding ring in Olive's stricken face. Then she nimbly stepped past her and into the house. Cousin Georgiana followed. She would not miss a moment of the great scene, even though Olive did look as if she were going to faint. Olive did not faint. She went stupidly down the street to Mrs. Bartlett's. What did Doss mean? She couldn't have. That ring. Oh, what fresh scandal was that wretched girl bringing on her defenseless family now? She should have been. Shut up. Long ago. Valancy opened the sitting-room door and stepped unexpectedly right into a grim assemblage of Sterlings. They had not come together of malice prepense. Aunt Wellington and Cousin Gladys and Aunt Mildred and Cousin Sarah had just called in on their way home from a meeting of the Missionary Society. Uncle James had dropped in to give Amelia some information regarding a doubtful investment. Uncle Benjamin had called, apparently, to tell them it was a hot day and ask them what was the difference between a bee and a donkey. Cousin Stickles had been tactless enough to know the answer. One gets all the honey, the other all the wax. And Uncle Benjamin was in a bad humor. In all of their minds, unexpressed, was the idea of finding out if Valancy had yet come home, and, if not, what steps must be taken in the matter. Well, here was Valancy at last, a poised, confident thing, not humble and deprecating as she should have been, and so oddly, improperly young-looking. She stood in the doorway and looked at them, Cousin Georgiana timorous, expectant, behind her. Valancy was so happy she didn't hate her people anymore. She could even see a number of good qualities in them that she had never seen before, and she was sorry for them. Her pity made her quite gentle. "Well, Mother," she said pleasantly. "So you've come home at last," said Mrs. Frederick, getting out a handkerchief. She dared not be outraged, but she did not mean to be cheated of her tears. "Well, not exactly," said Valancy. She threw her bomb. "I thought I ought to drop in and tell you I was married, last Tuesday night, to Barney Snaith." Uncle Benjamin bounced up and sat down again. "God bless my soul," he said dully. The rest seemed turned to stone, except Cousin Gladys, who turned faint. Aunt Mildred and Uncle Wellington had to help her out to the kitchen. "She would have to keep up the Victorian traditions," said Valancy with a grin. She sat down, uninvited, on a chair. Cousin Stickles had begun to sob. "Is there one day in your life that you haven't cried?" asked Valancy curiously. "Valancy," said Uncle James, being the first to recover the power of utterance, "did you mean what you said just now?" "I did." "Do you mean to say that you have actually gone and married that notorious Barney Snaith, that criminal, that?" "I have." "Then," said Uncle James violently, "you are a shameless creature, lost to all sense of propriety and virtue, and I wash my hands entirely of you. I do not want ever to see your face again." "What have you left to say when I commit murder?" asked Valancy. Uncle Benjamin again appealed to God to bless his soul. That drunken outlaw, that. A dangerous spark appeared in Valancy's eyes. They might say what they liked to, and of her, but they should not abuse Barney. "Say damn, and you'll feel better," she suggested. "I can express my feelings without blasphemy, and I tell you, you have covered yourself with eternal disgrace and infamy by marrying that drunkard. You would be more endurable if you got drunk occasionally. Barney is not a drunkard." "He was seen drunk in Port Lawrence, pickled to the gills," said Uncle Benjamin. If that is true, and I don't believe it, he had a good reason for it. Now I suggest that you all stop looking tragic and accept the situation. I'm married, you can't undo that, and I'm perfectly happy. I suppose we ought to be thankful he has really married her, said Cousin Sarah, by way of trying to look on the bright side. If he really has, said Uncle James, who had just washed his hands of Valancy, who married you? Mr. Towers of Port Lawrence. By a free Methodist, groaned Mrs. Frederick, as if to have been married by an imprisoned Methodist would have been a shade less disgraceful. It was the first thing she had said. Mrs. Frederick didn't know what to say. The whole thing was too horrible, too nightmarish. She was sure she must wake up soon. After all their bright hopes at the funeral. It makes me think of those what do ye call 'ems, said Uncle Benjamin helplessly. Those yarns, you know, of fairies taking babies out of their cradles. Valancy could hardly be a changeling at 29, said Aunt Wellington satirically. She was the oddest-looking baby I ever saw, anyway, averred Uncle Benjamin. I said so at the time. You remember, Amelia? I said I had never seen such eyes in a human head. I'm glad I never had any children, said Cousin Sarah. If they don't break your heart in one way, they do it in another. Isn't it better to have your heart broken than to have it wither up? Queried Valancy. Before it could be broken, it must have felt something splendid. That would be worth the pain. Dippy. Clean dippy, muttered Uncle Benjamin, with a vague, unsatisfactory feeling that somebody had said something like that before. Valancy, said Mrs. Frederick solemnly, do you ever pray to be forgiven for disobeying your mother? I should pray to be forgiven for obeying you so long, said Valancy stubbornly, but I don't pray about that at all. I just thank God every day for my happiness. I would rather, said Mrs. Frederick, beginning to cry rather belatedly, see you dead before me than listen to what you have told me today. Valancy looked at her mother and aunts, and wondered if they could ever have known anything of the real meaning of love. She felt sorrier for them than ever. They were so very pitiable, and they never suspected it. Barney Snaith is a scoundrel to have deluded you into marrying him, said Uncle James violently. Oh, I did the deluding. I asked him to marry me, said Valancy with a wicked smile. Have you no pride? Demanded Aunt Wellington. Lots of it. I am proud that I have achieved a husband by my own unaided efforts. Cousin Georgiana here wanted to help me to Edward Beck. Edward Beck is worth $20,000 and has the finest house between here and Port Lawrence, said Uncle Benjamin. That sounds very fine, said Valancy scornfully, but it isn't worth that. She snapped her fingers. Compared to feeling Barney's arms around me and his cheek against mine. Oh, Doss, said Cousin Stickles. Cousin Sarah said, Oh, Doss, Aunt Wellington said. Valancy, you need not be indecent. Why, it surely isn't indecent to like to have your husband put his arm around you. I should think it would be indecent if you didn't. Why expect decency from her? Inquired Uncle James sarcastically. She has cut herself off from decency forevermore. She has made her bed. Let her lie on it. Thanks, said Valancy very gratefully. How you would have enjoyed being Torquemada. Now, I must really be getting back. Mother, may I have those 3 woolen cushions I worked last winter? Take them, take everything, said Mrs. Frederick. Oh, I don't want everything, or much. I don't want my blue castle cluttered, just the cushions. I'll call for them some day when we motor in. Valancy rose and went to the door. There she turned. She was sorrier than ever for them all. They had no blue castle in the purple solitudes of Misthouse. The trouble with you people is that you don't laugh enough, she said. Doss, dear, said Cousin Georgiana mournfully, some day you will discover that blood is thicker than water. Of course it is, but who wants water to be thick? Parried Valancy. We want water to be thin, sparkling, crystal clear. Cousin Stickles groaned. Valancy would not ask any of them to come and see her. She was afraid they would come out of curiosity. But she said, Do you mind if I drop in and see you once in a while, Mother? My house will always be open to you, said Mrs. Frederick with a mournful dignity. "You should never recognize her again," said Uncle James sternly as the door closed behind Valancy. "I cannot quite forget that I am a mother," said Mrs. Frederick. "My poor, unfortunate girl." "I dare say the marriage isn't legal," said Uncle James comfortingly. "He has probably been married half a dozen times before, but I am through with her. I have done all I could, Amelia. I think you will admit that." Henceforth, Uncle James was terribly solemn about it. "Valancy is to me as one dead." "Mrs. Barney Snaith," said Cousin Georgiana, as if trying it out to see how it would sound. "He has a score of aliases, no doubt," said Uncle Benjamin. "For my part, I believe the man is half Indian. I haven't a doubt they're living in a wigwam." "If he has married her under the name of Snaith, and it isn't his real name, wouldn't that make the marriage null and void?" asked Cousin Stickles hopefully. Uncle James shook his head. "No, it is the man who marries, not the name." "You know," said Cousin Gladys, who had recovered and returned but was still shaky, "I had a distinct premonition of this at Herbert's silver dinner. I remarked it at the time, when she was defending Snaith. You remember, of course. It came over me like a revelation. I spoke to David when I went home about it." What, demanded Aunt Wellington of the universe, has come over Valancy? Valancy? The universe did not answer, but Uncle James did. "Isn't there something coming up of late about secondary personalities cropping out? I don't hold with many of those new-fangled notions, but there may be something in this one. It would account for her incomprehensible conduct." "Valancy is so fond of mushrooms," sighed Cousin Georgiana. "I'm afraid she'll get poisoned eating toadstools by mistake, living up back in the woods." "There are worse things than death," said Uncle James, believing that it was the first time in the world that such a statement had been made. "Nothing can ever be the same again," sobbed Cousin Stickles. Valancy, hurrying along the dusty road, back to cool Miss Stowis and her purple island, had forgotten all about them, just as she had forgotten that she might drop dead at any moment if she hurried. Chapter 28. Summer passed by. The Sterling clan, with the insignificant exception of Cousin Georgiana, had tacitly agreed to follow Uncle James's example and look upon Valancy as one dead. To be sure, Valancy had an unquiet, ghostly habit of recurring resurrections when she and Barney clattered through Deerwood and out to the port in that unspeakable car. Valancy, bareheaded, with stars in her eyes. Barney, bareheaded, smoking his pipe, but shaved, always shaved now if any of them had noticed it. They even had the audacity to go into Uncle Benjamin's store to buy groceries. Twice Uncle Benjamin ignored them. Was not Valancy one of the dead? While Snaith had never existed. But the third time he told Barney he was a scoundrel who should be hung for luring an unfortunate, weak-minded girl away from her home and friends. Barney's one straight eyebrow went up. "I have made her happy," he said coolly, "and she was miserable with her friends. So that's that." Uncle Benjamin stared. It had never occurred to him that women had to be, or ought to be, made happy. You pup," he said. "Why be so unoriginal?" queried Barney amiably. "Anybody could call me a pup. Why not think of something worthy of the Sterlings? Besides, I'm not a pup. I'm really quite a middle-aged dog. 35, if you're interested in knowing." Uncle Benjamin remembered just in time that Valancy was dead. He turned his back on Barney. Valancy was happy. Gloriously and entirely so. She seemed to be living in a wonderful house of life, and every day opened a new, mysterious room. It was in a world which had nothing in common with the one she had left behind. A world where time was not, which was young with immortal youth, where there was neither past nor future but only the present. She surrendered herself utterly to the charm of it. The absolute freedom of it all was unbelievable. They could do exactly as they liked. No Mrs. Grundy, no traditions, no relatives, or in-laws. Peace, perfect peace with loved ones far away, as Barney quoted shamelessly. Valancy had gone home once and got her cushions, and Cousin Georgiana had given her one of her famous candlewick spreads of most elaborate design. "For your spare room bed, dear," she said. "But I haven't got any spare room," said Valancy. Cousin Georgiana looked horrified. A house without a spare room was monstrous to her. "But it's a lovely spread," said Valancy with a kiss, "and I'm so glad to have it. I'll put it on my own bed. Barney's old patchwork quilt is getting ragged." "I don't see how you can be contented to live up back," sighed Cousin Georgiana. "It's so out of the world." "Contented?" Valancy laughed. What was the use of trying to explain to Cousin Georgiana? "It is," she agreed, "most gloriously and entirely out of the world." "And you are really happy, dear?" asked Cousin Georgiana wistfully. "I really am," said Valancy gravely, her eyes dancing. "Marriage is such a serious thing," sighed Cousin Georgiana. "When it's going to last long," agreed Valancy. Cousin Georgiana did not understand this at all, but it worried her, and she lay awake at nights wondering what Valancy meant by it. Valancy loved her blue castle and was completely satisfied with it. The big living room had 3 windows, all commanding exquisite views of exquisite Miss Dowies. The one in the end of the room was an oriel window, which Tom McMurray, Barney explained, had got out of some little old up-back church that had been sold. It faced the west, and when the sunsets flooded it, Valancy's whole being knelt in prayer as if in some great cathedral. The new moons always looked down through it. The lower pine boughs swayed about the top of it, and all through the nights the soft, dim silver of the lake dreamed through it. There was a stone fireplace on the other side, no desecrating gas imitation, but a real fireplace where you could burn real logs, with a big grizzly bearskin on the floor before it, and beside it a hideous red plush sofa of Tom McMurray's regime. But its ugliness was hidden by silver-gray timber wolf skins, and Valancy's cushions made it gay and comfortable. In a corner, a nice, tall, lazy old clock ticked, the right kind of a clock. One that did not hurry the hours away, but ticked them off deliberately. It was the jolliest-looking old clock. A fat, corpulent clock with a great, round man's face painted on it, the hands stretching out of its nose, and the hours encircling it like a halo. There was a big glass case of stuffed owls and several deer heads, likewise of Tom McMurray's vintage, some comfortable old chairs that asked to be sat upon. A squat little chair with a cushion was prescriptively Banjo's. If anybody else dared sit on it, Banjo glared him out of it with his topaz-hued, black-ringed eyes. Banjo had an adorable habit of hanging over the back of it, trying to catch his own tail, losing his temper because he couldn't catch it, giving it a fierce bite for spite when he did catch it, yowling malignantly with pain. Barney and Valancy laughed at him until they ached, but it was Good Luck they loved. They were both agreed that Good Luck was so lovable that he practically amounted to an obsession. One side of the wall was lined with rough, homemade bookshelves filled with books, and between the 2 side windows hung an old mirror in a faded gilt frame, with fat cupids gamboling in the panel over the glass. A mirror, Valancy thought, that must be like the fabled mirror into which Venus had once looked, and which thereafter reflected as beautiful every woman who looked into it. Valancy thought she was almost pretty in that mirror, but that may have been because she had shingled her hair. This was before the day of bobs, and was regarded as a wild, unheard-of proceeding, unless you had typhoid. When Mrs. Frederick heard of it, she almost decided to erase Valancy's name from the family Bible. Barney cut the hair square off at the back of Valancy's neck, bringing it down in a short black fringe over her forehead. It gave a meaning and a purpose to her little, 3-cornered face that it never had possessed before. Even her nose ceased to irritate her. Her eyes were bright, and her sallow skin had cleared to the hue of creamy ivory. The old family joke had come true. She was really fat at last. Anyway, no longer skinny. Valancy might never be beautiful, but she was of the type that looks its best in the woods. Elfin, mocking, alluring. Her heart bothered her very little. When an attack threatened, she was generally able to head it off with Dr. Trent's prescription. The only bad one she had was one night when she was temporarily out of medicine, and it was a bad one. For the time being, Valancy realized keenly that death was actually waiting to pounce on her any moment, but the rest of the time she would not, did not, let herself remember it at all. Chapter 29. Valancy toiled not, neither did she spin. There was really very little work to do. She cooked their meals on a coal-oil stove, performing all her little domestic rites carefully and exultingly, and they ate out on the veranda that almost overhung the lake. Before them lay Mistowys, like a scene out of some fairy tale of old time, and Barney smiling his twisted, enigmatical smile at her across the table. "What a view old Tom picked out when he built this shack," Barney would say exultantly. Supper was the meal Valancy liked best. The faint laughter of winds was always about them, and the colors of Mistowys, imperial and spiritual, under the changing clouds, were something that cannot be expressed in mere words. Shadows, too, clustering in the pines until a wind shook them out and pursued them over Mistowys. They lay all day along the shores, threaded by ferns and wild blossoms. They stole around the headlands in the glow of the sunset until twilight wove them all into one great web of dusk. The cats, with their wise, innocent little faces, would sit on the veranda railing and eat the tidbits Barney flung them. And how good everything tasted! Valancy, amid all the romance of Mistowys, never forgot that men had stomachs. Barney paid her no end of compliments on her cooking. "After all," he admitted, "there's something to be said for square meals. I've mostly got along by boiling 2 or 3 dozen eggs hard at once and eating a few when I got hungry, with a slice of bacon once in a while and a jorum of tea." Valancy poured tea out of Barney's little battered old pewter teapot of incredible age. She had not even a set of dishes, only Barney's mismatched chipped bits, and a dear, big, pobby old jug of robin's egg blue. After the meal was over, they would sit there and talk for hours. Or sit and say nothing, in all the languages of the world, Barney pulling away at his pipe, Valancy dreaming idly and deliciously, gazing at the far-off hills beyond Mistowys, where the spires of firs came out against the sunset. The moonlight would begin to silver the Mistowys dusk. Bats would begin to swoop darkly against the pale western gold. The little waterfall that came down on the high bank not far away would, by some whim of the wildwood gods, begin to look like a wonderful white woman beckoning through the spicy, fragrant evergreens. And Leander would begin to chuckle diabolically on the mainland shore. How sweet it was to sit there and do nothing in the beautiful silence, with Barney at the other side of the table, smoking. There were plenty of other islands in sight, though none were near enough to be troublesome as neighbors. There was one little group of islets far off to the west, which they called the Fortunate Isles. At sunrise they looked like a cluster of emeralds, at sunset like a cluster of amethysts. They were too small for houses, but the lights on the larger islands would bloom out all over the lake, and bonfires would be lighted on their shores, streaming up into the wood shadows and throwing great blood-red ribbons over the waters. Music would drift to them alluringly from boats here and there, or from the verandas on the big house of the millionaire on the biggest island. "Would you like a house like that, Moonlight?" Barney asked once, waving his hand at it. He had taken to calling her Moonlight, and Valancy loved it. "No," said Valancy, who had once dreamed of a mountain castle 10 times the size of the rich man's cottage, and now pitied the poor inhabitants of palaces. "No, it's too elegant. I would have to carry it with me everywhere I went, on my back like a snail. It would own me, possess me body and soul. I like a house I can love and cuddle and boss, just like ours here. I don't envy Hamilton Gossard the finest summer residence in Canada. It is magnificent, but it isn't my blue castle." Away down at the far end of the lake, they got every night a glimpse of a big continental train rushing through a clearing. Valancy liked to watch its lighted windows flash by and wonder who was on it and what hopes and fears it carried. She also amused herself by picturing Barney and herself going to the dances and dinners in the houses on the islands, but she did not want to go in reality. Once they did go to a masquerade dance in the pavilion at one of the hotels up the lake and had a glorious evening, but slipped away in their canoe before unmasking time back to the Blue Castle. "It was lovely, but I don't want to go again," said Valancy. So many hours a day, Barney shut himself up in Bluebeard's chamber. Valancy never saw the inside of it. From the smells that filtered through at times, she concluded he must be conducting chemical experiments or counterfeiting money. Valancy supposed there must be smelly processes in making counterfeit money, but she did not trouble herself about it. She had no desire to peer into the locked chambers of Barney's house of life. His past and his future concerned her not. Only this rapturous present. Nothing else mattered. Once he went away and stayed away 2 days and nights. He had asked Valancy if she would be afraid to stay alone, and she had said she would not. He never told her where he had been. She was not afraid to be alone, but she was horribly lonely. The sweetest sound she had ever heard was Lady Jane's clatter through the woods when Barney returned, and then his signal whistle from the shore. She ran down to the landing rock to greet him, to nestle herself into his eager arms. They did seem eager. "Have you missed me, Moonlight?" Barney was whispering. "It seems 100 years since you went away," said Valancy. "I won't leave you again." "You must," protested Valancy. "If you want to. I'd be miserable if I thought you wanted to go and didn't because of me. I want you to feel perfectly free." Barney laughed, a little cynically. "There is no such thing as freedom on earth," he said, "only different kinds of bondages, and comparative bondages. You think you are free now because you've escaped from a peculiarly unbearable kind of bondage. But are you? You love me. That's a bondage. Who said or wrote that the prison unto which we doom ourselves no prison is?" asked Valancy dreamily, clinging to his arm as they climbed up the rock steps. "Ah, now you have it," said Barney. "That's all the freedom we can hope for, the freedom to choose our prison. But, Moonlight—" He stopped at the door of the Blue Castle and looked about him. At the glorious lake, the great shadowy woods, the bonfires, the twinkling lights. "Moonlight, I'm glad to be home again. When I came down through the woods and saw my home lights, mine, gleaming out under the old pines, something I'd never seen before. Oh, girl, I was glad, glad." But in spite of Barney's doctrine of bondage, Valancy thought they were splendidly free. It was amazing to be able to sit up half the night and look at the moon if you wanted to be late for meals if you wanted to. She who had always been rebuked so sharply by her mother and so reproachfully by Cousin Stickles if she were 1 minute late. Dawdle over meals as long as you wanted to, leave your crusts if you wanted to. Not come home at all for meals if you wanted to. Sit on a sun-warm rock and paddle your bare feet in the hot sand if you wanted to. Just sit and do nothing in the beautiful silence if you wanted to. In short, do any fool thing you wanted to whenever the notion took you. If that wasn't freedom, what was? Chapter 30. They didn't spend all their days on the island. They spent more than half of them wandering at will through the enchanted Muskoka country. Barney knew the woods as a book, and he taught their lore and craft to Valancy. He could always find trail and haunt of the shy wood people. Valancy learned the different fairy likenesses of the mosses, the charm and exquisiteness of woodland blossoms. She learned to know every bird at sight and mimic its call. Though never so perfectly as Barney, she made friends with every kind of tree. She learned to paddle a canoe as well as Barney himself. She liked to be out in the rain, and she never caught cold. Sometimes they took a lunch with them and went berrying, strawberries and blueberries. How pretty blueberries were, the dainty green of the unripe berries, the glossy pinks and scarlets of the half-ripes, the misty blue of the fully matured. And Valancy learned the real flavor of the strawberry in its highest perfection. There was a certain sunlit dell on the banks of Mistowys, along which white birches grew on one side, and on the other, still, changeless ranks of young spruces. There were long grasses at the roots of the birches, combed down by the winds and wet with morning dew late into the afternoons. Here they found berries that might have graced the banquets of Lucullus, great ambrosial sweetnesses hanging like rubies to long, rosy stalks. They lifted them by the stalk and ate them from it, uncrushed and virgin, tasting each berry by itself with all its wild fragrance ensphered therein. When Valancy carried any of these berries home, that elusive essence escaped, and they became nothing more than the common berries of the marketplace. Very kitchenly good indeed, but not as they would have been, eaten in their birch dell until her fingers were stained as pink as Aurora's eyelids. Or they went after water lilies. Barney knew where to find them in the creeks and bays of Mistowys. Then the Blue Castle was glorious with them, every receptacle that Valancy could contrive filled with the exquisite things. If not water lilies, then cardinal flowers, fresh and vivid from the swamps of Mistowys, where they burned like ribbons of flame. Sometimes they went trouting on little nameless rivers or hidden brooks on whose banks naiads might have sunned their white, wet limbs. Then all they took with them were some raw potatoes and salt. They roasted the potatoes over a fire, and Barney showed Valancy how to cook the trout by wrapping them in leaves, coating them with mud, and baking them in a bed of hot coals. Never were such delicious meals. Valancy had such an appetite, it was no wonder she put flesh on her bones. Or they just prowled and explored through woods that always seemed to be expecting something wonderful to happen. At least, that was the way Valancy felt about them. Down the next hollow, over the next hill, you would find it. We don't know where we're going, but isn't it fun to go? Barney used to say. Once or twice night overtook them, too far from their blue castle to get back. But Barney made a fragrant bed of bracken and fir boughs, and they slept on it dreamlessly, under a ceiling of old spruces with moss hanging from them. While beyond them, moonlight and the murmur of pines blended together so that one could hardly tell which was light and which was sound. There were rainy days, of course, when Muskoka was a wet, green land. Days when showers drifted across Mistowys like pale ghosts of rain, and they never thought of staying in because of it. Days when it rained in right good earnest, and they had to stay in. Then Barney shut himself up in Bluebeard's chamber, and Valancy read or dreamed on the wolfskins with Good Luck purring beside her and Banjo watching them suspiciously from his own peculiar chair. On Sunday evenings they paddled across to a point of land and walked from there through the woods to the little Free Methodist church. One felt really too happy for Sunday. Valancy had never really liked Sundays before, and always, Sundays and weekdays, she was with Barney. Nothing else really mattered. And what a companion he was, how understanding, how jolly, how Barney-like. That summed it all up. Valancy had taken some of her $200 out of the bank and spent it in pretty clothes. She had a little smoke blue chiffon which she always put on when they spent the evening at home. Smoke blue with touches of silver about it. It was after she began wearing it that Barney began calling her Moonlight. Moonlight and blue twilight. That is what you look like in that dress. I like it. It belongs to you. You aren't exactly pretty, but you have some adorable beauty spots, your eyes, and that little kissable dent just between your collarbones. You have the wrist and ankle of an aristocrat. That little head of yours is beautifully shaped, and when you look backward over your shoulder, you're maddening, especially in twilight or moonlight. An elf maiden, a wood sprite. You belong to the woods, Moonlight. You should never be out of them. In spite of your ancestry, there is something wild and remote and untamed about you. And you have such a nice, sweet, throaty, summery voice, such a nice voice for lovemaking. Sure, and you've kissed the Blarney Stone, scoffed Valancy, but she tasted these compliments for weeks. She got a pale green bathing suit, too, a garment which would have given her clan their deaths if they had ever seen her in it. Barney taught her how to swim. Sometimes she put her bathing dress on when she got up and didn't take it off until she went to bed, running down to the water for a plunge whenever she felt like it and sprawling on the sun-warm rocks to dry. She had forgotten all the old humiliating things that used to come up against her in the night, the injustices and the disappointments. It was as if they had all happened to some other person, not to her, Valancy Snaith, who had always been happy. I understand now what it means to be born again, she told Barney. Holmes speaks of grief staining backward through the pages of life, but Valancy found her happiness had stained backward likewise and flooded with rose color her whole previous drab existence. She found it hard to believe that she had ever been lonely and unhappy and afraid. When death comes, I shall have lived, thought Valancy. I shall have had my hour. And her dust pile. One day, Valancy had heaped up the sand in the little island cove in a tremendous cone and stuck a gay little Union Jack on top of it. What are you celebrating? Barney wanted to know. I'm just exercising an old demon, Valancy told him. Chapter 31. Autumn came. Late September, with cool nights. They had to forsake the veranda, but they kindled a fire in the big fireplace and sat before it with jest and laughter. They left the doors open, and Banjo and Good Luck came and went at pleasure. Sometimes they sat gravely on the bearskin rug between Barney and Valancy. Sometimes they slunk off into the mystery of the chill night outside. The stars smoldered in the horizon mists through the old oriole. The haunting, persistent croon of the pine trees filled the air. The little waves began to make soft, sobbing splashes on the rocks below them in the rising winds. They needed no light but the firelight that sometimes leaped up and revealed them, sometimes shrouded them in shadow. When the night wind rose higher, Barney would shut the door and light a lamp and read to her, poetry and essays and gorgeous dim chronicles of ancient wars. Barney never would read novels, he vowed. They bored him. But sometimes she read them herself, curled up on the wolfskins, laughing aloud in peace. For Barney was not one of those aggravating people who can never hear you smiling audibly over something you've read without inquiring placidly, what is the joke? October, with a gorgeous pageant of color around Mistowis, into which Valancy plunged her soul. Never had she imagined anything so splendid. A great, tinted peace, blue, wind-winnowed skies, sunlight sleeping in the glades of that fairyland, long, dreamy, purple days paddling idly in their canoe along shores and up the rivers of crimson and gold, a sleepy, red hunter's moon, enchanted tempests that stripped the leaves from the trees and heaped them along the shores, playing shadows of clouds. What had all the smug, opulent lands out front to compare with this? November, with uncanny witchery in its changed trees, with murky red sunsets flaming in smoky crimson behind the westering hills, with dear days when the austere woods were beautiful and gracious in a dignified serenity of folded hands and closed eyes, days full of a fine, pale sunshine that sifted through the late, leafless gold of the juniper trees and glimmered among the gray beeches, lighting up evergreen banks of moss and washing the colonnades of the pines. Days with a high-sprung sky of flawless turquoise, days when an exquisite melancholy seemed to hang over the landscape and dream about the lake. But days, too, of the wild blackness of great autumn storms, followed by dank, wet, streaming nights when there was witch laughter in the pines and fitful moans among the mainland trees. What cared they? Old Tom had built his roof well, and his chimney drew. Warm fire, books, comfort, safety from storm. Our cats on the rug. Moonlight, said Barney. Would you be any happier now if you had $1 million? No. nor half so happy. I'd be bored by conventions and obligations then. December. Early snows and Orion, the pale fires of the Milky Way. It was really winter now, wonderful, cold, starry winter. How Valancy had always hated winter. Dull, brief, uneventful days, long, cold, companionless nights. Cousin Stickles with her back that had to be rubbed continually. Cousin Stickles making weird noises, gargling her throat in the mornings. Cousin Stickles whining over the price of coal. Her mother probing, questioning, ignoring. Endless colds and bronchitis, or the dread of it. Redfern's liniment and purple pills. But now she loved winter. Winter was beautiful up back, almost intolerably beautiful. Days of clear brilliance, evenings that were like cups of glamour, the purest vintage of winter's wine, nights with their fire of stars. Cold, exquisite winter sunrises, lovely ferns of ice all over the windows of the blue castle, moonlight on birches in a silver thaw, ragged shadows on windy evenings, torn, twisted, fantastic shadows, great silences, austere and searching, jeweled, barbaric hills, the sun suddenly breaking through gray clouds over long, white mistoes, icy gray twilights broken by snow squalls when their cozy living room with its goblins of firelight and inscrutable cats seemed cozier than ever. Every hour brought a new revelation and wonder. Barney ran Lady Jane into Roaring Abel's barn and taught Valancy how to snowshoe, Valancy who ought to be laid up with bronchitis. But Valancy had not even a cold. Later on in the winter, Barney had a terrible one, and Valancy nursed him through it with a dread of pneumonia in her heart. But Valancy's colds seemed to have gone where old moons go, which was luck, for she hadn't even Redfern's liniment. She had thoughtfully bought a bottle at the port, and Barney had hurled it into frozen Mistowis with a scowl. "Bring no more of that devilish stuff here," he had ordered briefly. It was the first and last time he had spoken harshly to her. They went for long tramps through the exquisite reticence of winter woods and the silver jungles of frosted trees, and found loveliness everywhere. At times they seemed to be walking through a spellbound world of crystal and pearl, so white and radiant were clearings and lakes and sky. The air was so crisp and clear that it was half intoxicating. Once they stood in a hesitation of ecstasy at the entrance of a narrow path between ranks of birches. Every twig and spray was outlined in snow. The undergrowth along its sides was a little fairy forest cut out of marble. The shadows cast by the pale sunshine were fine and spiritual. "Come away," said Barney, turning. "We must not commit the desecration of tramping through there." One evening they came upon a snowdrift far back in an old clearing which was in the exact likeness of a beautiful woman's profile. Seen too close by, the resemblance was lost, as in the fairy tale of the Castle of St. John. Seen from behind, it was a shapeless oddity. But at just the right distance and angle, the outline was so perfect that when they came suddenly upon it, gleaming out against the dark background of spruce in the glow of that winter sunset, they both exclaimed in amazement. There was a low, noble brow, a straight, classic nose, lips and chin and cheek curve modeled as if some goddess of old time had sat to the sculptor, and a breast of such cold, swelling purity as the very spirit of the winter woods might display. "All the beauty that old Greece and Rome sung painted, taught," quoted Barney. "And to think no human eyes save ours have seen or will see it," breathed Valancy, who felt at times as if she were living in a book by John Foster. As she looked around her, she recalled some passages she had marked in the new Foster book Barney had brought her from the port, with an adjuration not to expect him to read or listen to it. "All the tintings of winter woods are extremely delicate and elusive," recalled Valancy. "When the brief afternoon wanes and the sun just touches the tops of the hills, there seems to be all over the woods an abundance, not of color, but of the spirit of color. There is really nothing but pure white after all, but one has the impression of fairy-like blendings of rose and violet, opal and heliotrope on the slopes. In the dingles and along the curves of the forest land, you feel sure the tint is there, but when you look at it directly, it is gone. From the corner of your eye you are aware that it is lurking over yonder in a spot where there was nothing but pale purity a moment ago. Only just when the sun is setting is there a fleeting moment of real color. Then the redness streams out over the snow and incarnadines the hills and rivers and smites the crest of the pines with flame. Just a few minutes of transfiguration and revelation, and it is gone. "I wonder if John Foster ever spent a winter in Misthouse," said Valancy. "Not likely," scoffed Barney. "People who write tosh like that generally write it in a warm house on some smug city street." "You are too hard on John Foster," said Valancy severely. "No one could have written that little paragraph I read you last night without having seen it first. You know he couldn't." "I didn't listen to it," said Barney morosely. "You know I told you I wouldn't." "Then you've got to listen to it now," persisted Valancy. She made him stand still on his snowshoes while she repeated it. "She is a rare artist, this old Mother Nature, who works for the joy of working and not in any spirit of vain show. Today the fir woods are a symphony of greens and grays, so subtle that you cannot tell where one shade begins to be the other. Gray trunk, green bough, gray-green moss above the white gray-shadowed floor. Yet the old gypsy doesn't like unrelieved monotones. She must have a dash of color. See it. A broken dead fir bough of a beautiful red-brown swinging among the beards of moss. "Good Lord, do you learn all that fellow's books by heart?" was Barney's disgusted reaction as he strode off. "John Foster's books were all that saved my soul alive the past 5 years, averred Valancy. "Oh, Barney, look at that exquisite filigree of snow in the furrows of that old elm tree trunk." When they came out to the lake, they changed from snowshoes to skates and skated home. For a wonder, Valancy had learned, when she was a little schoolgirl, to skate on the pond behind the Deerwood School. She never had any skates of her own, but some of the other girls had lent her theirs, and she seemed to have a natural knack of it. Uncle Benjamin had once promised her a pair of skates for Christmas, but when Christmas came, he had given her rubbers instead. She had never skated since she grew up, but the old trick came back quickly, and glorious were the hours she and Barney spent skimming over the white lakes and past the dark islands where the summer cottages were closed and silent. Tonight they flew down Misthouse before the wind in an exhilaration that crimsoned Valancy's cheeks under her white tam. And at the end was her dear little house on the island of pines with a coating of snow on its roof, sparkling in the moonlight. Its windows glinted impishly at her in the stray gleams. "Looks exactly like a picture book, doesn't it?" said Barney. They had a lovely Christmas. No rush, no scramble, no niggling attempts to make ends meet, no wild effort to remember whether she hadn't given the same kind of present to the same person 2 Christmases before, no mob of last-minute shoppers, no dreary family reunions where she sat mute and unimportant, no attacks of nerves. They decorated the blue castle with pine boughs, and Valancy made delightful little tinsel stars and hung them up amid the greenery. She cooked a dinner to which Barney did full justice, while Good Luck and Banjo picked the bones. "A land that can produce a goose like that is an admirable land," vowed Barney. "Canada forever." And they drank to the Union Jack a bottle of dandelion wine that Cousin Georgiana had given Valancy along with the bedspread. "One never knows," Cousin Georgiana had said solemnly, "when one may need a little stimulant." Barney had asked Valancy what she wanted for a Christmas present. "Something frivolous and unnecessary," said Valancy, who had got a pair of galoshes last Christmas and 2 long-sleeved woolen undervests the year before, and so on back. To her delight, Barney gave her a necklace of pearl beads. Valancy had wanted a string of milky pearl beads, like congealed moonshine, all her life, and these were so pretty. All that worried her was that they were really too good. They must have cost a great deal, $15 at least. Could Barney afford that? She didn't know a thing about his finances. She had refused to let him buy any of her clothes. She had enough for that, she told him, as long as she would need clothes. In a round black jar on the chimney-piece, Barney put money for their household expenses. Always enough. The jar was never empty, though Valancy never caught him replenishing it. He couldn't have much, of course, and that necklace. But Valancy tossed care aside. She would wear it and enjoy it. It was the first pretty thing she had ever had.